So let's talk about the watershed characteristics. There's land use, soil type, time of concentration, antecedent moisture condition, just to name a few. So we'll go over those right now. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Okay. All right, so when we're talking about watershed characteristics, we already talked about the area itself. So that's one of the main characters. How big is the watershed? The land use. Is it commercial, residential? Is it a park? What is the land made of? What is it used for? Is it agricultural? The soil types, the hydrologic soil groups, there's 4 different types, A, B, C, D. That means remember when we talked about how soil was permeable and porosity and all that? How well does the water take into the soil? Remember, clays don't take very much water. They don't infiltrate very well, whereas gravels and sands permeate a little bit better or infiltrate better into the ground. We also have time of concentration. That, imagine, is one little drop of water, the furthest hydraulically remote place on the watershed gets to our discharge point. So we have to figure out that a few different ways. We have to look at the overland flow, the length of that channel, the slope of the channel that the water's traveling, the vegetative cover. Is it going to be grass? Is it going to be prairie? Is it going to be asphalt like Home Depot? So the cover of the ground makes a big difference. We've also got coefficients and curve numbers. So there's a runoff coefficient. That means what's the ground like? What's the surface roughness, the hydraulic roughness? Those are kind of intermingled things. Whereas imagine a desert. There's no grass, nothing but sand, versus, a nice manicured lawn with St. Augustine grass. And it's really mushy. So you have different roughness coefficients. And then when you do have a channel, whether it be a swale or a ditch or a river, then it has a shape, a parabolic shape or a trapezoid shape or even a rectangular shape. It could be a concrete ditch for that matter. We also have to look at that existing storage, that not depressional, but the detention area where natural water just sits. Maybe it's a wetland or an existing pond or lake. We also have to take into account when it's a new development that there's no structures. But what if it's an old development and we're just adding on? We have to take into account existing drainage structures for our site. So these are the main ones that we'll be talking about, and we'll be going over some of these in more detail. All right, so again, we have our different basins. So one basin might have an overall curve number because the land use is a lot of different things, versus a smaller area that has maybe just a golf course, okay? So curve number, depending on how big of the land area we're looking at, can actually be different. The percentage breakdown, maybe it's more Home Depots or commercial development versus residential development. All right. So land use, land cover. So I've got some pictures up here. So we've got a lot of asphalt. If I'm looking at this top picture, we've got a lot of asphalt there, where we've got some grass over here and more of a downtown city center. Or it could be a roadway, cloverleaf. It's got a lot of grass, but there's a lot of asphalt. Or it could be a mix. We've got a forest over here, and then we've got a city over here. Or it could be looking at it like a regular subdivision that has an intermix of asphalt and grass area. Now, the thing that we're talking about here is the curve number. It's associated with the land the development's being used for, and the soil type that it's sitting on. So if I've got, soils that drain really well in an area that's residential, the curve number might be a little lower than, let's say, we have a little bit of grass area on this industrial park. So the curve numbers are different. Curve numbers range usually about a 38 all the way to 100. 100 being a parking lot and 38 being, open grass space that a lot of infiltration of water into the ground will take place. Okay, so look over here, read through the definitions and kind of get used to those. So here is the hydrologic soil groups. There's like I said, A, B, C, and D. A is the best soil that we have the highest infiltration rate, that there's not much runoff. And then we have group D, which has the highest runoff. That means that the ground is already usually saturated, no more water's going through, or the ground could be clay. You also have mixed dual hydrologic soil groups. It could be an AD, a BD. Now, how do we figure all this out? Well, the Soil Conservation Service, or the NRCS, I'm sorry, the Natural Resource Conservation Service will give us a map. There is a website that we'll be using that I'll show you how to go over and figure that out. Now here's where you have the cover type, that land use. Here's lawns and open spaces. If it's got a good soil, then it's a 39. If it's a bad soil, that curve number is an 80. Take a look at streets. You have basically your roadways, 98, 98, 90. I don't care what type of soil it is. Underneath of it is basically impermeable. Now, the average impervious area, when we're starting to look at our residential and commercial areas, can be broken down by percentage of impervious areas, but it's still, we have these soil groups. Now, the higher the curve number, the more runoff you're going to get. The lower the curve number, the less runoff you get. So runoff is huge. Runoff is the amount of water that we have to take into ponds. We have to make our ponds bigger if we have more runoff. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through all of this semester. So this is the website. If you click on this link here, it'll actually take you to the website and it'll look like this up here. If you click on the little green button, the start, the WSS, that'll actually pop up and you type in over here the address that you want to look at, and you'll end up getting an area of interest. And I created this little area of interest, and it tells me what the soils are in this area of interest. So we've got the soil unit map, and then it'll actually have the soil names. When you create the report, it'll actually tell you what type of soil it is, A, B, C, or D. That's the most important for us when we start to design. Now, this is a basically a breakdown of all the different soils, if depending on the percent clay, percent silt, and percent sand. That's what most soils are made out of, those three things. But you also have organic materials like in wetlands. But we're not looking at it in that aspect, but that's the reason these curve numbers are given them, is because these soil types dictate what type of infiltration potential that it actually has. So go ahead and take a look at this website. One of your homework assignments will be looking at that website. Now, one of the important watershed characteristics is the time of concentration. Now, the time of concentration means, okay, if this over here is the hydraulic remote point and this dashed line is our watershed, and down here is where our point of analysis or our discharge point is, then the water is going to follow this path. Remember, it's perpendicular to the lines. This is called the hydraulic path, the most remote point hydraulically, and it follows. It doesn't go straight down here. We're taking the longest time to get there. Now, the components that make up the time of concentration calculations are surface roughness. Is it grass? Is it asphalt? Is it, what type of ground is on there? The channel shape. Well, channel shape means after it flows overland for a while, it'll go into a swale or a valley. So the channel shape that the water actually drains to will be, a trapezoidal channel, a parabolic channel, something like that. Now, slope means the actual ground, how steep the slope is or how flat the slope is. And then channel length just means the overall distances for each one of these. We'll have an assignment on this, and I'll take you step by step on how to do all these calculations. But the biggest thing is how long, for time of concentration and travel time, how long does it take to get from the furthest point hydraulically to the point of interest? So, like I said, we'll go over that more in detail. Now, antecedent moisture condition means, okay, so if I'm looking at this, did it rain yesterday, and we're doing our analysis the next day? If it rained yesterday and it's all, wet and damp like this, it's going to have a different infiltration rate than if it was a nice dry soil up here. So we always assume an antecedent moisture rate condition where it's not completely dry, but it's not completely saturated. We give it a kind of a middle ground when you do our calculations. All right, so just as a reminder, what we talked about, kind of like a summary, we talked about the land use and how it's related to curve number. Big important value, the curve number. The soil type, is it a hydrologic soil group, A, B, C, or D? A being the best, D being the worst. Time of concentration, how long does it take to get from the farthest point in our watershed hydraulically to our discharge point? And then antecedent moisture condition, how wet is the ground before we even start modeling? So I'm going to stop here and then we'll go over our next topic.